Steve here with ICRPG behind the DM screen. This episode we'll be talking about turns and actions. Now I have to warn you, I do have a few modifications that I'd like to pitch. I want to hear if you guys have used any of these mods or if you have some mods of your own. As always, please like and subscribe. So this is going to be on page 6 of your rulebook, talking about turns, and of course one of the things we absolutely love about ICRPG is that it's really more of a set of guidelines than hard and fast rules. So it says yes, turns give the session structure, energetic pace, but if it feels weird to play in turns, hey, go ahead and use freeform. So I want to talk a little bit later on about what that freeform might actually look like. So I do like this. Who goes first? One of the things, in many RPGs about rolling for initiative, it's always variable, and then you got to figure out, who's what, where, and put them all in order. And so I do like just the simplified deal that, look, when you start, everybody rolls at 20, highest roll goes first, and you go clockwise. That makes total sense. So let's take a minute and talk about this idea of turn and turn order. Now, I come from a board gamer background, and in board games there are a lot of mechanisms that are in place that I think would really help us out to make ICRPG and other role-playing games more interesting, more exciting, and maybe more realistic in how we approach turns. One of the mechanisms that I've toyed with, I have not perfected it, so I'd love to hear your comments below if you have tried to implement such a thing. But in board games, it's called pre-programmed motion. So in other words, all of the players decide before the turn starts what they're going to do. And then when that turn starts, it's sort of like it's revealed and they all enact that motion simultaneously. You don't, it's not like I'm going to do this and then you're going to do this and then I'm going to do this and you're going to do this. Because when you think about how life works, like let's say we're in a battle and you've got one character and they're going to run up to the top of the stairs and jump over here or whatever. In the meantime, you're going to pull out a sword. Well, they don't know that. It just happens. And so with this whole idea of turns in progression, it sort of, I think, makes it so that actions are changed according to what somebody else was doing that you would not have in real life known what they were going to do. So I'd love to hear how you breach that issue in your games, if you've come up with something that works in a way that kind of is consistent, that doesn't cause too many hiccups. One of the main things in board games that we try to avoid are when players are not playing, in other words, when it's not their turn, that you're not just felt like you're sitting around in the sidelines just waiting for somebody. We call that paralysis of analysis, where it's just like, oh my gosh, this person takes forever to try to make their, decisions or do their action. And so the people that are not playing, they start to get bored, and that can really add a lot of time to an evening. It can just kind of make things bog down. So, if we can mitigate that, I think that's always better. So I would love to hear your comments on how you handle simultaneous action rather than just progressive turns, or if you do progressive turns, how do you engage the other players that are sitting there waiting for their turn to happen? This next part we'll talk about in another video, essentially what happens when the turn starts as far as how you go through. And I know this might sound a little bit out of order, but it just kind of makes more sense to me. But on the next page in the rule book, page 7, talks about when the dice start rolling, what do? You describe the action, you roll the dice, and you get the results. However, I want to talk really quickly about a modification to that from one of my friends on the West Coast. So a friend of mine and I were talking the other day about role-playing games and how the fun part is the role-playing, right? Being in character, doing actions that this character would do, putting yourself in that kind of mindset. And this modification has to do with once those dice start rolling, you're in character. Now, my friend's dad was a DM apparently back in the 80s, and it was really great, implemented a lot of really cool stuff that I'll bring into these videos, I'm sure. But one of those things was, hey, as soon as it's the turn, you're in character. So unless you say, hey, time out, to ask a question or to clarify something, anything you say or do at that table can and will be held against you. So if you're just like whispering over to your buddy and you're going to say whatever, if you didn't say, hey, time out, GM, DM, I want to clarify something, or I'm just making a side comment, that's what your character said. That's what your character did, and that is going to have repercussions. So I think that's kind of a good thing to implement, just to get everybody basically in character, stay in character until you say time out. Pretty cool mod. In the core rules, there are 3 kinds of turns. There's action only, move near an action, and move far. We'll get into motion in another video. But as far as the actions go, actions are basically what happens when you're right next to something. So you are, wanting to open a chest and you're right near the chest, or you want to hit a monster with a sword and you're right next to him with a sword. That's pretty self-explanatory what the action is. Moving far is getting away or getting near something that is far away on the scale. So it's essentially, it won't allow you to do an action because you're so far away that you have to spend all of that to get there. And then there's move near and action. Now this is where I actually have a little bit of an issue, because right here I feel like this defines the turn in the sense of having 2 things. If you have to move and then the action, I'm kind of the opinion that that's kind of like you're getting 2 versus this one over here where you're just action only, right? Because you're already there. So for me, and then I feel like moving far is almost like 2 motions. You know what I mean? Like you're like 2 move nears equals a move far, right? So the one that's deficient is essentially here. So what I'm wondering, and again, I have not implemented this, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Comment below. What about, instead of just having 1 action only if you're close, if you could have 2? So that way everything is kind of weighted as a 2 action sort of thing. Let me know what you think. As far as the actions themselves go, that's pretty straightforward. You've got simple actions that, there's really no reason to roll anything. Somebody's going to walk up a stairs, whatever. That's, unless they've got some mobility issues or something problematic, no need to roll. That's very straightforward. Then you've got checks, which is basically rolling the d20. You have to meet or beat the target. These are, I think, well described in the book as instantaneous but uncertain actions. So they just require a single dice roll to see if you're going to pull it off or not. And then you've got attempts. Attempts are going to be your more complex things. They're going to be your bigger tasks, or tasks that take multiple times, like you're really trying to whittle down some huge boss or something like that, or you're trying to maybe crack a secret code that's going to require some special magic or something like that, or a few different steps. And so the attempts are going to be meet or beat the target plus your roll for effort, and we'll get into all these things later on in another part of the rules. But in general, again, I think it's fairly common. We'll talk about target in another video, and we'll talk about rolling for effort in another video. But those are your basic actions. You've got simple actions, no roll required. Checks, you do a quick roll, the action's immediate, and then attempts, which is multiple actions usually. So there you have it in a nutshell, how turns and actions work in ICRPG. Again, we kind of mentioned a few modifications. I'd love to hear your comments on what you think about that, but also if you've got some creative solutions or workarounds for those things, please feel free to comment below. It helps all of us. And as always, thanks for watching, and may your dice always roll with advantage.